love these people who think that they know things that they clearly cannot know, but feel free to pontificate on things they have no knowledge of, no evidence of, and no rational reason to think is true. Yet they think so anyhow. They can't admit that reality exists because it gets in the way of their religious delusions, so you get something like this, a clearly irrational theist explaining why people become atheists. Hey pal, if that's what your chorus sounds like, give it up and go home.
If you ask 100 atheists why they don't believe in God, most of them will say that it's because there is no evidence for God's existence. But even if that is so, it doesn't differentiate atheism from agnosticism. The reasons that atheists give for their atheism could be given by agnostics for their agnosticism.
What a surprise! Yet again, we have someone who has no clue what an agnostic is. So I'm going to explain it one more time. An agnostic is someone who thinks that there's no way to determine if a god or gods exist. It has nothing whatsoever to do with whether or not you believe in a god or gods. Agnosticism deals with proof. It deals with knowledge. Atheism deals with belief. Not only can you be both an agnostic/gnostic and an atheist/theist, you must be. Every single person out there, without exception, holds both agnostic or gnostic views and atheist or theist views. Every single one of them. If you say you're an agnostic or gnostic without also acknowledging your atheism or theism, you're doing logic wrong. Knock it off!
Suppose there was literally no evidence for the existence of God. For example, that people weren't even aware of the concept of God. It's possible for both God to exist and for there to be no evidence of his existence. It could be that God exists, but has kept himself hidden.
There's a difference between having no evidence for something and the concept that these things do not exist at all. There's a lot of things for which we have concepts, but which we have absolutely no objective evidence for their existence. I mean, take dragons. Everybody knows what a dragon is, but they're mythological creatures that have no basis whatsoever in reality. And yeah, it's certainly possible that dragons are real, that they're just really, really good at hiding. But atheism, or I guess in this case it would be adragonism, isn't about what you can prove is factually true about reality. It's about what you believe. Atheists and adragonists disbelieve because they find no credible evidence whatsoever to take the claims made by God and dragon believers seriously.
In that case, we wouldn't know that he exists, but he would exist all the same, and thus theism would be true. Since atheism and theism can't both be true, a complete lack of evidence for God's existence doesn't justify atheism. Otherwise, what's the difference between atheism and agnosticism? Agnostics could also say that there's no evidence for God's existence.
Well, no, atheism and theism cannot both be true, but then again, neither can they both be false. One of them has to be correct, and one of them cannot be. And the only rational means we have of telling the difference is by examining the objective evidence, and whether the religious like it or not, they have absolutely zero evidence on their side. And yeah, theists must, if they're rational, admit that they have no evidence, yet they choose to believe anyhow. The only side that actually follows the evidence to its logical conclusion are the atheists.
Defining atheism as a lack of belief in God's existence doesn't help clarify the difference either, since agnostics don't believe in God, and thus lack a belief in his existence.
Well, that's because atheism and agnosticism are two entirely different concepts. They cover two entirely different, but not logically inconsistent positions. Atheists do lack belief in gods. The majority do not actively believe that no gods exist. They simply reject the claims made by theists based on the complete and utter lack of evidence that theists have.
Neither do arguments against God's existence explain why some people choose to call themselves atheists, as opposed to agnostics. One of the most popular arguments against the existence of God is the problem of evil. The problem of evil attempts to demonstrate the incompatibility of evil and the existence of an all-good, all-powerful God.
That's because they're two different things. It's like saying you don't understand why someone might describe themselves as male and Hispanic. They describe two entirely different sets of characteristics. Atheism/theism is a binary concept. You either believe or you don't. There's no third option. By the same token, agnosticism/Gnosticism is a binary concept. You either believe you can have knowledge of gods or you don't. There's no third option. So long as you remain ignorant of these facts, you will continue to look like an idiot.
If the deductive version of the problem of evil is valid, it doesn't establish God's non-existence. The conclusion of the argument is not God does not exist, but God cannot both be all good and all powerful. It's possible that God exists, but that he's not all good or all powerful, or both, and so his existence is not incompatible with evil.
The problem of evil isn't designed to show that God doesn't exist. It's designed to show that the definition of God that Christians have come up with is logically inconsistent. It doesn't directly address whether any gods exist or not. It points out how idiotic the concept of the Christian God actually is.
There is no requirement that God must be all good and all powerful. None of the Christian creeds contain the words all-powerful and all good, or their surrogates, and all sorts of deities have been invoked by religions and philosophers down the ages. So an agnostic could agree that the problem of evil is valid, but that God might exist.
No, there isn't. But that is the concept that Christians, by and large, have come up with and insist that God is. Now, if you think your God is not all-powerful or all good, then by all means change your definition of what you think your God is, and we'll reevaluate the argument. Your side is what is causing the problem, not ours. So, sure, let me know when the majority of Christians decide that their God is imperfect and fallible. I'll wait.
The only way to define atheism in a manner that would differentiate it from agnosticism is to define it as the affirmation of God's non-existence. For if God does not exist, then theism is false. This way, atheists are asserting something different than agnostics about God. They are claiming that God doesn't exist, while agnostics are claiming not to know whether he exists.
Again, you got no idea what the hell you're talking about, which I guess is no surprise. The only way most atheists would affirm that there's no God is if there was evidence that gods did not exist. And of course, there's no way to have evidence for the universal non-existence of anything, so that's a ridiculous standard. It's funny how so many theists spend their time arguing that atheists must be wrong, when all they have to do to close the argument is prove themselves right. You can never prove your position correct by proving another one incorrect. You have to have evidence, and if you don't, as theists know they don't, then you lose. Period.
In my experience, atheists are reluctant to adopt this definition of atheism. They insist that atheism is a lack of theism or a lack of belief in God, which are statements that could be accepted by agnostics.
Because it's an idiotic definition given by somebody who has no clue what the hell they're talking about. But that's no surprise, is it?
My intuition is that agnostics who choose to call themselves atheists, that is, atheists who refuse to define atheism in a way that logically rules out the truth of theism, do so less for philosophical reasons than for polemical reasons.
Ah yes, the ever-popular, but somebody hurt you excuse. Because they can't accept that there might be something wrong with their beliefs, they have to find an excuse for why people aren't treating them right. Yeah, that's a winner, isn't it? Ah yes.
Atheists know they can't exclude the possibility that God exists, and therefore the possibility that theism is true. But they don't call themselves agnostics because atheist has more bite to it. The lack of belief and no evidence atheists call themselves atheists rather than agnostics as a way to signal their contempt for religion.
Nobody's excluding anything. I mean, there could be dragons out there somewhere. I've got no way of knowing whether there are or not. However, because we have no evidence whatsoever that dragons actually exist, I have no reason to believe that they do. If someone comes up with objective and demonstrable evidence that they are real, I'll change my position. And the same goes for gods. Come up with undeniable proof that gods exist and I will believe. Until then, I will not. Get it through your head.
One only has to observe the behavior of atheists on YouTube to see that their rejection of religious belief is colored by sour feelings. The atheists on YouTube are fond of hurling abuse at theists, accusing them of being liars, con artists, and psychopaths.
Well, not that I've seen, and I've seen a lot of atheist videos on YouTube. The only thing anyone is sour about is the piss-poor performance of theists in showing that their gods actually exist. Maybe instead, you should be watching those theist videos because there is plenty of evidence of them lying, being con artists, and while I might not use the word psychopath for most of them, irrationality certainly fits the bill.
The atheist vlogger, Messianic Manic, routinely calls Christian apologist William Lane Craig names, and accuses theists like theorist, who try to engage atheists in earnest debate, of Gish galloping.
Do you even know what a Gish gallop is? It was coined based on the debate tactics of Dwayne Gish back in the 1980s. He became known for throwing as much extraneous nonsense into a debate, making as many claims as he could in a short amount of time, so the person he was debating couldn't possibly disprove them all within the time limit. And then he pretended that because his opponent hadn't disproven them all, that they must be valid. It's blatantly dishonest, but that's creationism for you. And William Lane Craig, whether you like it or not, uses the same dishonest tactics.
The comments atheists leave under the Messianic Manic's videos are even more hateful than anything he dares say. The comments under his videos have called for William Lane Craig's death and accused Craig and other Christians of being psychopaths and liars. I have also been called names, despite entering these conversations on gentle terms.
Maybe it's just me, but I haven't seen any legitimate death threats against anyone in TMM's comments. You'd have to point those out to me. After all, if there were any legitimate threats of violence, the person making them should be reported to YouTube and they would have lost their account at the very least. And if they were actually legitimate, they should also be reported to the FBI. Has any of that happened? Not that I've heard of.
On Facebook, I and other Christians are often treated to the same abuse by atheists. The Christians I talk to online are confused by this. They don't understand why atheists are so angry and cynical.
Maybe that's because theists have proven time and time again that they are dishonest, that they don't care about the facts, that they don't care about reality, that they have absolutely no evidence to present to support their claims, that they only care about emotion and feeling good about their beliefs. Of course atheists get upset. Theists are the religious version of internet trolls. You'd be upset too.
So why are atheists often angry at theists, and so uncharitable toward them in debate? I believe that atheists are angry at theists for a reason that comes close to why feminists are angry at men. Like the feminists, the atheist anger and cynicism originates from a damaged relationship with someone in their formative years.
Ah yes, the ever-popular, but somebody hurt you excuse. Because they can't accept that there might be something wrong with their beliefs, they have to find an excuse for why people aren't treating them right. Yeah, that's a winner, isn't it?
The atheist anger toward religion is personal. It wouldn't make sense for atheists to be angry at religious people for being mistaken about the existence of God. The insults and personal attacks that atheists hurl at theists imply that theists are arguing in bad faith, that they already know their religion is false.
It's not personal. I mean, I get equally upset at, say, flat earthers or geocentrists who argue on the same basis. I get equally upset with anti-vaxxers and homeopathy advocates. These people all argue on an emotional basis, not an intellectual one. They don't care if what they say is true, so long as it makes them feel good.
I believe the trajectory from believer to atheist goes something like this. The atheist is raised in a religious environment. This could mean that he was raised by religious parents, or lived in a religious community, or had religious friends, or all of the above.
Well, I was a believer at one point in time, so far so good. Of course, there's tons of atheists who never believed in any gods, so this clearly doesn't hold true for everyone.
Over the course of his life, he witnesses apparently religious people committing sins without showing any outward signs of guilt or struggle. Everyone sins, but believers who sin are expected to be contrite. They're supposed to struggle with their sins, not rationalize them.
Nope, sorry. My deconversion had nothing whatsoever to do with witnessing anything bad done by believers. In fact, as I've said before, I had a relatively positive religious experience growing up. Where it all went wrong was I decided if Christianity was true, it ought to stand up to critical scrutiny. And guess what? It doesn't. So I stopped being a Christian simply because it doesn't make any logical sense. And I'm willing to bet my experience is not alone.
A sincere believer would be ashamed of his lust, dishonesty, and worldly concern with social status. Churchgoers who do these things, especially the last one, and make no effort to seek forgiveness, are clearly not going to church because they believe the religion is true.
Now, I can't prove it, but I have my doubts that the majority of theists actually buy into their religious beliefs. Most, I think, are just hedging their bets, going to church because they think that's what they're supposed to do, singing the songs because that's what they've been indoctrinated into, and when they walk out the door, they largely stop caring. The majority of theists in the world, I'd wager, aren't really theists. They're just playing the part because that's what their social circle expects of them.
If they believed, say, that Christianity was true, they would realize the gravity of their sins and cease them at once. At the very least, they would seek forgiveness. But they are instead observed seeking social status within the churches.
Wait a minute. Christianity is based on the belief that you can't stop sinning. Man is an inherently evil fallen creature that cannot do good no matter how hard they try. That's why they needed Jesus to come along and save them. Do you not know your own theology?
The churchgoers who openly lie and sabotage other people do so because it pays off. Their social status is enhanced only because their behavior is rewarded by other church members. This must lead some people to become atheists.
Church, for the most part, is a social event. Nobody really cares what happens in the pews. They care about making connections outside while drinking coffee. And most of these people, they never really become atheists, so clearly you've got no idea what you're talking about.
They observe the high standing these hypocritical churchgoers enjoy and conclude that religion is purely social. They come to believe that religion exists to fulfill a communal need, but no one really believes in it.
Well, it is. We don't have to observe anything. That's simply the reality for the vast majority of churchgoers. Clearly, you've made the same observations, you just don't want to believe it because it gets in the way of your emotional attachment to your beliefs.
They feel let down by religion. They wanted to believe that religion was true, but the pride and abuse of other church members destroyed their faith.
I never felt let down by religion. I missed it after I left because it was, to a certain degree, a security blanket, a community of people who would help me out if I needed help, just because we were all part of the same social gathering. And I walked away from that, not because I was ever hurt by the church, but because I could not continue to believe something that I no longer was convinced was factually true. I cared more about my intellectual integrity than I did about my social comfort. And if you don't, you've got a problem.
This is why atheists jump all over people like Jim Bakker, Peter Popoff, and Jimmy Swaggart. These corrupt religious leaders add more weight to the atheist conviction that religion is a sham. They remind atheists of the people they knew who went to church and professed to be religious.
Now, I won't say that all religion is a sham, but we're finding more and more that the people in the pulpit, they really don't buy into the religious nonsense, but they're trapped having no other marketable job skills. Go check out the Clergy Project, where an ever-increasing number of former pastors and priests are joining together to get these poor trapped people out of the clergy and into better jobs.
It's not that atheists expect religious believers to be perfect. They would expect them, if their religion were true, to feel guilty for their sins.
Well, the whole idea of sins is idiotic to begin with. You can't prove that your God exists, therefore the idea of transgressing against this imaginary man in the sky is silly. But yeah, I'll agree with you. Most of these people, they're not really guilty about their supposed sins. They cry crocodile tears when they get caught, and then they go right back to scamming the gullible when they get out of prison. Jim Bakker's a perfect example of this. He was put in prison on fraud and conspiracy charges and served 8 years. And the second he got out, he went right back to fleecing his flock, this time selling prepper crap, and the religious are so gullible, they lined right back up behind him.
I'm aware of other reasons non-believers might have for being hostile to religion. They might see religion as an obstacle to progress, by which is usually meant whatever deviant behavior the left is pushing at the moment.
Nobody is hostile toward religion. Now, we're unhappy with dishonesty, and religion is full of that. We actually care about the facts, and religion isn't interested. And I'm not remotely on the political left. I'm a conservative that thinks religion and religious beliefs are demonstrably harmful, and I back that up with evidence all the time. But, continue with your paranoid delusions, why don't you?
But that doesn't explain the atheist cynicism. The atheists I've talked to online think that Christians are confidence men. They are constantly looking for evidence of hypocrisy or bad will on the part of believers. This implies that they have witnessed this behavior from Christians.
But that's the thing. We have witnessed this behavior from Christians and from every other religious group as well. It isn't hard to find instances of lying, cheating, stealing, murder, body mutilation, child molestation, etc. from Christians and other religious adherents. And if you're not aware of this, you're not looking.
Besides, the church has been an instrument of social progress. The Sandinistas used liberation theology priests to warm Latin Americans to socialism. And how many emergent churches have twisted the meaning of biblical passages to support feminism and sexual deviancy?
Religion, and Christianity is no different, can be used to support virtually any conceivable position by ripping passages out of context and making excuses to ignore things they don't like. Christianity, for example, was used as both a justification for American slavery and as justification for ending it at the same time. These religious books are just big books of multiple choice. You can get to almost any conceivable position depending on which parts you choose to focus on. That's why there's more than 42,000 distinct sects of Christianity in the world. Or weren't you aware of that?
The churches have been infiltrated by leftists for years. Think about it. If you were a leftist, you wouldn't try to get rid of churches, but take them over.
Well, considering the majority of the country still claims to be Christian, I'd say your paranoia is showing through. And that's a big part of modern-day Christianity, the idea that everybody's out to get you. It's just more evidence of the delusional nature of religious belief.
As for the atheists, I'm not sure what can be done to quell their anger. They may be damaged for life.
No, the ones damaged are the ones who believe irrationally. But there's hope. More and more people are flooding out of the churches, having discovered that belief in an unsupported God makes no sense whatsoever. Your side is losing at an ever-increasing rate. Maybe you ought to join those lucky escapees. You know, it's this kind of ridiculous religious grandstanding that's just so laughable. It's clear that this is someone who has no clue what the hell they're talking about. They're just so delusionally absorbed in their religious beliefs that reality no longer means anything to them. It becomes a war between the in-group and the out-group, and when the out-group is winning, as is clearly the case here, the in-group just gets more and more paranoid. They fear that their cherished beliefs are going away, whether or not they actually ought to, and pretend that everybody's out to get them. And then they wonder why people look at them funny, and they get even more paranoid over that. Religion is going away whether they like it or not. It's only the most indoctrinated fundamentalist idiots who have neither the education nor the intellect to figure out how wrong they are that will remain. But eventually, they're going to all die out, and the world will be a much better place for it. And won't that be a good thing?